Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Script. My name is Nikki. I am your host, and today we are going to get into how indecision, like what that stems from, right? There's a lot of adults out there who you just can't make a decision, right? You just like, I have to text my best friend. I have to ask my mom. I have to ask XYZ. I need to go, you know, meditate and make sure that God gave me three different signs that this is the right path, right? And you already know, what you want to do, but you sit around and you have to, like I said, get spiritual guidance, get 3D guidance, get all of the guidance here. So we're going to break that down today. We're going to look into that. Before we do, it's so funny. I was just thinking, this is has to do with the podcast, not necessarily the episode. But I was just thinking to myself, I was like, we've been at enough episodes now. I think I need an official opener. I need like some music and stuff like that. So I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna get that going sometime before the 100th episode hits. But today we're gonna be talking about indecision, where it comes from, why it's here, and how we can actually move through that and, learn how to just go with our instinct even if other people disagree with it. That's a big one, right? When we're so conditioned to want to make sure that we have approval, want to make sure that people agree with us, it's hard to make our own decisions because we're waiting for somebody to say, yes, that's great. So I want you to think about this, right? Have you ever thought about something that you wanted to do or knew about something that you wanted to do, but you're like thinking to yourself, I need to ask a couple people, right, what they think before I make a decision? Or like the example I just gave, you need to pray and ask for, a sign, ask for something to pop up, a blue butterfly or something like that. Let me tell you right now, blue butterflies, that's my go-to when I'm looking for a sign. Um, have you ever like thought like, okay, I know what I want, and then you talk yourself out of it? I want you to think about a time. It's like when you take a test, right? And you're like, "Oh, I know the answer to that test." And then you second guess it and you go with answer number 2 and then you get the answers and it's like, "Oh, answer number 1 was right." And you're like, "Damn, I knew that." So many of us are living our lives on that same type of loop where we're like, "Damn, I knew I wanted to do that." But so I let so and so talk me out of it, or I talked myself out of it because somebody told me, "Are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want to do?" Right? And this ties into my next bullet point, feeling confident until someone questions you. I used to be very guilty about this, right? I used to struggle with saying no to people that I respected because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. Although, in hindsight, their feelings were not going to get hurt. And, I used to feel really confident in what I had decided until somebody started questioning me. And I used to actually get very triggered by questions. And the irony, the thing that I recognize now is me being triggered by questions. It was not a reflection of them questioning me. It was because it brought up my own like insecurity, right? It made me second guess my own decision, my own decision, my own plan on what I was going to do. And so when I look at that in hindsight now, I'm like, you're not really mad at them for questioning you. You're more mad because you couldn't stay confident in what you had decided, right? You felt the need to defend. We're going to get into the why in just a second, but I used to always feel the need to defend things, right? Over explaining things, right? Things like that, which is actually my next bullet point. Over explaining decisions so that people will understand, they'll approve, right? Someone starts to question you, and it could be an innocent question, and then you start to like word vomit, over explain, like, well, I'm doing this because XYZ, and this is how I see it, and whoop de whoop. You know what I mean? And it's like, whoa, wait a second, like they didn't need all that. And even if they disagree, they still didn't need all that, right? Needing reassurance after you have already chosen something, after you've already made a decision. Who is guilty of that one? And you can deny it. You will know if you're guilty because right when I said that, you're going to feel it somewhere in your body. You're going to feel it in your chest. You're going to feel it in your stomach. You're going to be like, oh, that's me, right? You can deny it, but you already felt it, right? Making a decision and then immediately wondering if it was wrong. Was that the wrong one? Even though that decision's been weighing on your mind for God knows how long, you start to think, is that the right decision? Did I make the right decision? Okay. Now, the question I want to ask you is, what if you don't struggle with decision making because you don't know what you want? What if you struggle because somewhere along the way you learned that knowing what you wanted was not enough? I think we're all guilty of that to an extent. Okay. So I want you to think back for a second. I want you to think back into childhood. That's what we're going to get into today, is a little bit of childhood stuff. And so, one thing about children, and I don't know why we're made this way. I feel like it sets us up for failure. I don't know why we're made this way, but children naturally crave approval, right? They naturally kind of attention seek. They naturally like want the approval of the adults around them, whether it's their parents, their grandparents, their teacher, right? Any trusted adult. They want that approval. They crave that approval. They want to be, praised. They want to be told good job, and you see in their little faces, they light up when that happens. Now, as an adult, we know adults can't do that 24/7, right? We've got busy lives. And so I'm not saying that it has to happen all the time. I'm not saying that if it didn't happen all the time that you're going to develop this. What I am saying is, when it happened so little that you actually got the praise you wanted, and you ended up, kind of being in charge of your parents' emotions, being like the parentified child, as I call it, right? Where you had to keep your parents' emotions in check, or you had to behave a certain way so that you could keep the peace in the house. Well, then you've taken on a role that's way too big for you to have to take on. And then two, you're doing that in hopes that if you do that, that your parent will approve of you, right? I see this a lot, and even in myself, right? In kids whose parents were, maybe emotionally unavailable, maybe physically unavailable, right? They weren't necessarily there, because there's two sides, right? There's like the actually parents not there, you're not going to get that praise at all, abandonment side, because they're not there. But then there's also the parents there, but they're not emotionally there, right? There's no emotional like maturity, emotional connection, things like that. And so what do children do? Children continue to try to gain the approval, to try to get the approval of their parents, to try to, do whatever they can to make their parents happy. That's really what children do. And like I said, it's in so many ways, I do wonder. I'm like, why were we made like this? I don't have that answer. Maybe one day I will, but not today. But anyways, and so when that happens, what happens subconsciously, because as you know, the subconscious is always taking in information, but especially up until the age of 7, the subconscious is taking in so much information. It's learning what is safe and what is not safe, and it kind of carries on with you throughout your adulthood. Those first 7 years are very crucial, and you start to kind of learn that the way you behave in certain settings, even if it goes against what you wanted to do, is going to determine if you have approval or not. And what happens with kids who grow up with emotionally immature parents is then it's like they're constantly craving that approval. And if they're not careful going into adulthood, they're going to continue that with other adults, right? As an adult, they're going to continue that with other adults. And it's interesting because you're not consciously learning as you're doing this, like, oh, I should become an approval seeker. I should be, I can only do things if somebody allows me to. We're not learning that consciously. That's not a conscious belief, right? If you ask any adult, they'll be like, no, I do what I want, right? And at the same time, like, while that sounds believable, it's like, well, let's look a little bit deeper into the subconscious. Do you actually do what you want, or do you second guess it and get approval before you go and quote do what you want, right? And so it's more, if you've ever had this thought, it's more like a thought of like, okay, before I act, I need to figure out how this is going to affect everyone else. Dramatic pause. Before I act, I need to figure out how this is going to affect everyone else. And this is not to be confused with being considerate of somebody else, because they're involved in the decision making. That's not what I'm getting at. But before you do something for you that you feel in your heart, you feel in your spirit should be done, you are like, I got to figure out how this is going to affect everyone else. Even though you not acting on it is going to affect you negatively. And so that's what happened. You created an identity around being responsible for other people's emotions, being responsible being agreeable to what other people are saying, right? Being low maintenance, being, emotionally perceptive, being needed, being able to, not stir the pot, different things like that. And if you are, an entrepreneur or something like that, doing anything that's going against the grain, you're going to have to learn how to not seek approval. Because you can see the people who don't seek approval. You can test it, because the people who don't seek approval, they have a lot of people who disagree with them. They have a lot of people who are like, why did he or she do that? They shouldn't have done that, right? And if you were, so used to trying to find praise or not ever getting the praise you wanted, or whatever that case may be, and you then see other adults now in adulthood, that it's like, oh, okay, they do what they want, but they have people who are like mean to them. They have people saying this about them. They have people who are, disagreeing with them loudly. Well, what's happening now is the reason that you're not going to jump on board into that is because 7-year-old you is like, oh no, I remember that one time that I tried to do something my way and I got yelled at by my parents, and I don't want to feel that ever again, right? You're comparing apples to oranges in that essence, or in that instance. And but then what's happening in comparing apples to oranges is you are missing out on what's supposed to be going on in day to day. You're missing out on opportunities, and you're continuously deciding to shrink and staying indecisive because you don't want to upset other people because of what happened in childhood. But the irony of that is, the more that we do that, then we only upset ourselves. And I don't know about you, but when I go to sleep at night, like, I'm the only one in my brain. I don't know about, I'm pretty sure we're all like that. I don't know if some of y'all are not, but at the end of the day, like, the only one who can really get into your own thoughts is you. And so, there's a saying, like, you spend the most time with yourself, you need to make yourself happy, right? And so when we take it back to the identity piece, and the identity that was developed in childhood that is now controlling the shots in adulthood that we need to get out of, there was at one point a reason that the identity worked. Excuse me for a second. Excuse me. Anyways, I did not want to pause it and deal with all that. There was probably a reason the identity worked, right? Once upon a time. And that's the thing with identities. They will work for a while until they don't work anymore. And then that's when you got to shed it and let the new one emerge, and so on and so forth. But the reason that identity probably worked at one point is because when you were a child and you're inside the four walls of your house, like, doing that, it got you connection. It was able to prevent conflict. It made the environment more predictable. Right? There's a lot of adults out here walking around that are wanting a predictable environment. And the irony about that is, the only thing in life that is guaranteed is change and unpredictability. Of course, you can have routine. Of course, you can do all that. But, like, the only constant is change, right? Maybe it's what earns you praise. Back then, that's what earned you praise. Being agreeable, being able to just kind of read the room in your head, and then be agreeable to what needed to happen, or being a little bit low maintenance, or whatever it was, right? That's what earned you praise. It made you feel valuable. It was fine. You were finally getting the approval that you needed. You were finally getting, the affection and the desire that you needed. And so when it comes to approval seeking, it's not that it's like this pathetic character flaw going on, but at one point in time, it was an intelligent way of navigating your environment. But the issue now in your indecisiveness is when that childhood strategy has now become your adult identity, because we're not children anymore. So the things that worked in childhood are not going to work now. And that's the work I do with some of my clients, is undoing these childhood loops, these childhood things, so that the adult identity, who you were born to be, who you were meant to be, the leader that you want to be, can actually emerge, right? So that you can actually step into leadership, step into CEO energy, step into business, right? Step into whatever it is that requires you to have more boundaries, to learn how to tell people no, to maybe ruffle some other feathers to keep your own inner peace, right? Different things like that. Other people's responses to your boundaries is not really, like, that's not really your concern at the end of the day, but we have to learn that because it's going to feel uncomfortable at first, okay? So let's break this down into an identity loop. Y'all know I love me an identity loop, right? So this could be you have the old identity. I'm the person who keeps everyone okay. Any oldest daughters listening? If so, raise your hand. My hand is up. Right? I am the person who keeps everyone okay. You're the one who, reads a room, double checks everybody's emotions, make sure everybody's comfortable before anything happens. You kind of feel, and this is something I had to let go of. I'm speaking from experience. You feel like, okay, well, I don't want to do this and this because, there's conflict there and that'll ruffle feathers and I don't want so and so to be uncomfortable and I don't want so and so, to feel left out and all this. I'm gonna get into this identity loop, but real quick, I used to put my head in a like tizzy trying to navigate things like that. I don't know if I've ever told you guys the story. Obviously, you guys know my parents are divorced. There was a lot of conflict there, and there a lot of just a lot of chaos there. My mom and I's relationship, very on again, off again. We're talking, we're not talking, so on and so forth. And, so during a period of time where we were connected, and I also knew that maybe there was tension with like her and my dad's side of the family due to the past. I used to put myself in a tizzy making sure that when it came to like their grandchildren, that I would try to separate birthdays. I would try to do, okay, I'm going to do two birthdays so I can have one with dad's side of the family and one with, like mom and something small so she's not left out and blah 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 and all of these things, right? So that was the identity I was holding on to, being the person who kept everyone okay, until I was like, fuck that. I'm not doing that anymore. And I stopped, right? But I mean, it was a couple years of that. It was a few years of that, making sure that everybody was all right, double checking, reading the room, making sure if they were in the same room that I'm kind of keeping everybody occupied and, just taking on responsibility that wasn't mine at the end of the day. And so we've got rid of that identity. We've grown out of it. But let's go through the loop. I am the person who keeps everyone okay. That's the old identity. What triggers it? The trigger is I have to make a decision that someone may disagree with, right? I have to um you know, or it could the trigger could even be I have to make sure that everybody is comfortable. That can be another trigger. That was one of mine, right? The uncertainty of it all is like, what are they going to think? Are they going to be uncomfortable? Again, taking everybody's responsibility. So the familiar response to that is to maybe ask opinions, to overthink, to explain, to delay, to do what I was doing, setting up two birthday parties for each child, different things like that. The behavior is choosing the safest, most approved option or not choosing one at all. Right? If we did it the Nikki way, if we did it the way that I actually wanted to do it, I would have thrown one party and been like, y'all come, y'all don't come. Like, this, you guys' discomfort is not my responsibility. And I can say I think I only did that like twice. Or no, I did that 3 times. And then I was uncomfortable because I could see that other people were uncomfortable until I released the identity. The outcome becomes temporary relief because nobody is upset. Hey, nobody's upset if I'm doing it this way. Even though you are in a tizzy. And then the identity becomes reinforced. I am the person who keeps everyone okay. Right? Because that's what you're doing. You're keeping everybody okay. And so that's one example of an identity loop, and how it carries on and carries on and carries on. And the reason that it is scary or uncomfortable to break away from that, and this goes into a little bit of last week's episode, is because it's unknown. What happens if I'm not the person who keeps everyone okay? Or what if we flip it? Instead of me being the person who keeps everyone okay, what if I'm the person who just keeps me okay? How does that feel when you hear that? For those of you who have this identity, it feels selfish. That's how I felt. I was like, well, that's selfish. I can't keep me okay. I got to keep everybody else okay. But like I said earlier in the episode, at the end of the day, you are still the one who has to lay down at night and think your own thoughts, listen to your own thoughts. My parents aren't in my head at night. I'm not in their head at night, right? Same thing. And so the approval piece in all of this then comes back into decision making, right? I could not make a decision for to keep or that was going to keep me peaceful because it would disrupt what I had going on. It would disrupt the identity of being the person who keeps everyone okay. So because of that, I couldn't make a decision that was going to keep me at peace. back then. We don't do that anymore. And then that starts to bleed into other areas because now you're constantly seeking approval everywhere else. You invest in business containers, coaching containers, and you're not putting your best foot forward because you're seeking approval of, uh your coach or your mentor, right? And so sometimes you're not some so because of that, sometimes you're not putting your best foot forward because your best foot forward is actually in a little bit different direction than what they've said. But because you won't speak up because you're the person who keeps everyone okay, well, now you're kind of, just getting by, just doing these, doing the little things that you have been told to do, because if you don't do that, you're no longer the person who keeps everyone okay. the identity then the identity then it starts to get threatened, which is something that we talked about in the last episode. Everything really comes back to identity at the end of the day. And your identity starts to develop in childhood. I believe identity development is around age 10. That's when you start to kind of like separate yourself. Like, wait, I get to be my own person. And you're looking at the adults around you. But that's a whole other conversation. So how else can this show up in your normal adult life, right? How else can this, this need for approval show up? And you know what? I'm gonna give you an example, and it can show up so small. I'm gonna give you a couple examples, and then I'm gonna tell you about something that I had to catch myself in recently, because I still catch myself in identity loops. I teach this, and I still have to catch myself in identity loops. And so, but here's some ways it can show up in normal adult life. I want for career, right? I want to leave, but what will everyone think? See, you might be able to trust your own journey into leaving your career and going into entrepreneurship, but everybody around you might not. What do you mean you're going to leave your job? What do you mean? It's stability. You make good money, right? What will everyone think? So now you don't do it because you're seeking the approval of everybody else. Business. I know what I want to sell, but let me ask six other people whether it's a good idea. And you know what? I'm going to call some of you out. Maybe it's not even about asking six other people it's a good idea. Maybe you're going to have a whole conversation with AI. Tell me the pros and cons if I release this product, right? Now you've got something to work with. Now you've got a reason not to do it, or a reason to do it, or validation, right? Parenting. Will people think I'm a bad mom if I do this differently? Right? I homeschool my children. That's different. Oh, excuse me, right? And I remember like feeling a little shy about that in the beginning, until I was like, no, I this is what I want to do. Okay? Appearance. Do I like it, or do I need everyone else to like it? Is this something that I actually want to wear, or is this something that I think other people are going to think I look good in? That's one of the small ways it can show up. Boundaries. I know I don't want to go, but I need a reason they'll accept. I can't just say no. I can't just say no, because then again, that threatens my I'm the person who keeps everyone okay identity. So I need to come up with an excuse as to why, right? I told you I would tell you about a recent one that happened to me. So there's this fitness watch that I want, right? It's not real expensive. It's like $300. And there's two versions of it. So there's a series 5 and a series 6. I want the series 6, and I'm going to get it, but I'm going to tell you I had to go through identity loop about this. I want the series 6 because it has a sleep wake feature that wakes you at your optimal like window, right? So you set an alarm, and then it finds like the lightest sleep in the 30 minutes before that to wake you up. Now, I used to have an app that did that hooked up with my Apple Watch. I loved it. My Apple Watch died, yada yada, right? So I don't have that anymore. And so I'm comparing these, and I'm like, oh, I really like that. And then I was like, okay, well, that appears to be the only difference in the features, and it's $100 more. And, in the grand scheme of things, that's not really that much more, but because it has the value that I want. And at the same time, I was almost about to convince myself to go with the 5 because of the money. But see, the money thing was not the issue for me. That's not the thing that I was like freaking out about. Excuse me. That's not the thing that I was freaking out about. The thing that I was freaking out about was that what will first off my husband, but what will they think if they realize like, "Oh, you got the newest model just for that feature," right? And so again, I had to catch myself because I'm like, you are approval seeking with your own money that you make on your own. You see what I'm saying? So it can be so small like that. And once you recognize like some of these identity loops, you start to catch them in the smaller moments. The brain is very tricky like that. The brain is very sneaky like that, where if I didn't pause and dig a little bit deeper into that, I would have thought it was just the $100. But I know myself, right? I was like, that does not make sense. I've spent more money on stupider stuff in the past, right? That does not make sense to me. And so I had to think about it, and I was like, it has nothing to do with the money. It has nothing to do with the money. It's about what other people will think if they find out that that's why I spent the extra money. And so again, these identity loops, they exist all over the place. And every time you start to catch them, you get to undo them little by little. You get to, you get to unravel them. You get to choose differently each time you catch the loop. I caught that loop and I was like, okay, so that's not even my own thought. That's somebody else's thought. I'm going to buy the watch this week. I'm very excited. I've already decided. I just need to find a color that I like, right? And so it's little things like that. Little things like that is how it shows up in just very normal adult life. That's a very normal adult situation. I'm chilling on the couch, looking on Amazon, comparing these watches, right? Very normal thing, very normal thing. But to catch yourself in the loop, see, that's going to take some time. It doesn't have to take a long time once you recognize the core part of it and you just start to question, well, where did that come from? How come I had that thought? Why am I resisting this, right? Those are some things to think about as this stuff starts to come up. So as we get back to our topic at hand, I want to make one thing clear. There is a difference between advice and approval, okay? Seeking information is not necessarily approval seeking. And I don't want to go too far off the rails on this because I don't want, if you're not working with me, I cannot catch your ego in real time, right? I don't want to go too far off on this because I don't want your ego to be like, see, that's just what we're doing. We're seeking information. And it's actually not that. It's actually something different because, like I just said, the brain is very tricky. Okay. But, anyways, you can ask someone for their perspective and still trust yourself. The difference is advice is going to be give me some information I might not have considered, right? You've already made the decision, but maybe you're talking to somebody who's like, tell me something a little bit more. Maybe I haven't considered. Maybe I can make this better, right? Different things like that. Approval can let's see, approval can disguise itself like that. And the way to tell if it's approval is one, listen to your body, right? If your body is like, okay, well, I got to change everything, or you start to think maybe it's not a good idea, that could be very much approval seeking. Approval seeking is also a lot of like, tell me which choice I'm allowed to make, but that's on a subconscious level. You're not going to go out and consciously say that. You're going to go out and say, what do you think about this, right? And we're waiting to hear the good things. And if you hear that somebody disagrees or that it's bad, then you want to change it. That's seeking approval. Advice is just, hey, tell me some things I haven't considered, right? And so a great question to think about whenever you are trying to figure out if it's approval versus advice is whenever you're asking somebody something, ask yourself this. If everyone I asked disagreed with me, would I still choose this? And that's a grain of salt, right? Some of y'all don't need to choose it when everybody's disagreeing with you. But we're not going down there right now. Okay. But if everyone I asked disagree with me, would I still choose this? Because in that, sometimes you'll realize, like, oh, I was not actually gathering information. I was trying to get permission. I used to do this in business all the time. If I wasn't asking my coach, I would ask my friend. And the second my friend would be like, I don't know, I'd be like, ooh, I don't know either. Even though I just knew 5 minutes ago. Okay. I'd be like, oh, I don't know either. Okay. So you have to get to know yourself in that. And to wrap this up, I will say this. This is why, with everything that we've talked about today, seeking approval and, holding on to the identity of the person who makes sure everyone else is okay and all of that. This is why sometimes people saying like, well, you just have to trust yourself. That rhetoric does not work at face value. You cannot go on and, read quotes. How do I stop being a people pleaser? How do I stop feeling guilty for saying no? How do I hold boundaries? All of these things. You can read all of that as much as you want, but you've spent decades holding on to this identity. And you have to train yourself to be able to catch the loop. You have to train yourself to be able to really pause and see when it's happening, okay? And this is something that I had to learn. I've done a lot of mentorships and I've been in mentorships in this. I've started mentoring in this, right? Like trying to understand who we are when we strip away who we thought we had to be to make everybody else comfortable. And this is something that I see women struggle with. This is something that I struggled with. I'll tell y'all a brief story and I'm wrapping up. I remember I was in a session with the mentor was it last summer? Yes, it was last summer. And she made me get up and start like, hitting my chest and waking up that identity that had been sleeping for so long. Because I had fallen just so deep into like not wanting to cause trouble, people pleasing, all kinds of things. And, she had to reawaken that identity. She had to really reawaken it. And I didn't even realize how far deep I had gone until we were in the session and I'm like crying because like all of this stuff is coming out that I realized like, oh my God, I have been people pleasing all year, right? And so with that being said, this is why, like I said, and I was reading the quotes, I was reading the books, I was looking at the stuff, but you sometimes you need that accountability. You need somebody to be like, no, this is what's going on. I know because I see myself in you, right? And so I say that to say, take the time to get to know yourself. Take the time to reinvest in yourself. Take the time, to understand like who did I learn I needed to be? What did that identity protect me from? What happens inside of me when someone disapproves? Which decision am I making to create my life and which am I making to manage somebody else's perception of me? Perception is a dangerous thing, right? We start to do things that are out of character because we want to be liked. We want to be perceived a certain way. You can't control everybody's perception of you. And so I say all that too to say like I do have something coming out. I have created it's going to be a working title, the Parentified Child Playbook, okay? So that is a PDF audio that I have coming out for those of you who are, maybe struggling with boundaries, struggling with self-sabotage, struggling with anything that we discuss in this episode that's going to help you, guide you through it, walk you through it and things like that so that you can start catching those loops. If you want coaching, if you're like, yeah, that sounds great, I really need like a hands-on mentorship, send me an email, nikki@nikkilyn.com, or email me, oh my gosh, or DM me at Nikki Lynn Mayo on really any social handle. I'm on all of them now. But send me a DM and we can discuss like any options about working together, one-on-one coaching, different things like that. But this is what I help my clients through. This is what I had to help myself through. And yeah, that is some of the good stuff that is coming out. So for the next week, I want y'all to do this. Before you ask for someone else's opinion about a personal decision, something that's going to affect you, decide what you think first. Okay? You can ask for advice afterwards. And heck, do it as a social experiment. Make a decision and go ahead and ask for advice and see what comes forward. Do you feel the need to change your decision when somebody disagrees with you? Do you feel confident? Are you feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, right? Once you talk to somebody else off after you felt confident yourself, okay? I want you to think, what do I want? What do I think? What would I choose if nobody were going to react to it? That right there will tell you if you are, still letting 7-year-old approval seeking you run the show, or if you are stepping out of that identity and stepping into, leadership identity, being in charge of your own life identity, right? Okay. Wherever you feel the discomfort, that is going to be where the real work is. And don't I know it, y'all? Don't I know it? Anyways, like I said, my DMs are open. My email is open. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Let me know, how you felt about it. And let me know what resonated with you. I love to hear it. I love when I get emails about the episodes. It does make me happy. So definitely keep them coming. And I want you to remember this as we close out. The goal isn't to become someone who doesn't care what anybody thinks. Well, you know what? Maybe it is. The goal is to become someone who can hear what other people think and not even worry about abandoning what you know. Okay? That is not like Yeah, that's rooted in self-trust, that's rooted in like confidence, which is everything we need to be leaders, which is everything we need to run businesses, which is everything we need to, be uh moms who show up for our children, all of that. So, like I said, send me messages, send this to whoever needs to hear it. Stop people pleasing, stop self sabotaging. You don't need everybody's approval. And go enjoy your day. I will talk to you all next week. And that's all. Bye bye.